Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Eleanor. I am the projects and communications manager at The Big Draw, and welcome this evening to joining us for Exploring Creative Practice, where we're hoping to have our first drawn-in conversation for 2023 with Andy McNally, and also the lovely Annelise from Concept is going to be joining us. If you haven't joined us on this conversation before, we have had these conversations a few times. We have a wonderful archive of previous joining conversations. You can have a look either in our reels and our videos on Instagram. You can also check them out over on our YouTube channel, where our full archive is there. And believe me, there are quite a few to keep you entertained and for you to all explore and have some fun around. So all kinds of different artistic creative practice. We've got tattoo artists, digital art designers, and a whole load of other wonderful, fun people for you to go and listen to. So do have a look at that. Hopefully, Anne will be joining us soon. But Annalise is here.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi. For everyone who hasn't joined us previously, Annelise Sandberg is the wonderful head of marketing over at Concepts. So she is here to be able to answer, I suppose some more of maybe the technical concepts questions that can come up in these kinds of conversations. But this evening is all about the creative process and that wonderful overlap between what the Big Draw comes for and what Concepts App is all about, playfulness and creativity and all those wonderful things that can appear in between. You are very welcome to add comments over the course of this evening. You can put questions it is really helpful if you can click that little question mark icon inside the bubble, because then we can find your questions that bit easier without necessarily scrolling through all the different comments. But do feel free to share over the course of the discussion. Now let me just see if Andy is with us. There we are. Andy McNally is here. Very exciting. Hopefully, everyone. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't jinx it, but you never know. I was gonna say hopefully we don't have any technical issues, and we don't. Hi, Andy.
Hello.
See, I didn't jinx it. It was absolutely fine.
Yeah, it took me a second to get everything to cooperate, but
yeah, such as the wonderful pros and cons of Instagram Live, but wonderful to be able to bring the Big Draw and Concepts App audiences together. Andy, thank you so much for joining us and for being part of the ongoing event that Concepts and the Big Draw do together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Mike Brody's in the chat, everyone. Nice to see you, Mike. Mike was the first person to go through this wonderful process. We had a fantastic conversation with him last year, so go and do check that out. But Andy, let's crack on, because we say roughly an hour. Everyone who is joining us, you are forewarned. Sometimes we do go over. But we do appreciate that everyone has various different requirements and responsibilities, so do feel free to dip in and out, or of course you can always catch up later on. But exploring the creative process was the name that we gave to this conversation, Andy, which really came out of the conversations we had about your creative inspiration and where you actually find that. And I think maybe it'd be quite nice to talk a little bit more about your creative practice, the art that you produce, and maybe we can start to explore, your inspirations as well.
Well, like a lot of creatives, I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I don't, my mother was an artist, so obviously she's an inspiration, and started me off drawing very early, sometimes just to keep me distracted, but not only that, I think she encouraged my art from the get-go, and continues to encourage my art to this day. So, that's one of my first sources of creative inspiration. And then obviously like I think all of us at some point, you realize that you were influenced from a million different things, old and new, from childhood to later in life. Even now, there's plenty of people and things that I look at for inspiration. But in a nutshell, I think that my stuff is influenced by kind of the cartoon retro things that I grew up with, which would be like Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like you can certainly say like Yogi Bear, and the Flintstones and the Jetsons were all things that they produced, and it's there. But you know, it's not only those things. Obviously, there's more like the 50s and 60s style illustration certainly crept in, and it's obviously is older than I am. I'm not quite that old, but you know, growing up seeing those advertisements and things like that, there's a lot of that style that sort of rubbed off. I like the illustration style, and some of those books would have been some children's books, to be fair, you know, when I was in early grade school and learning to read would have been illustrated by some of those illustrators. So I think they crept in without me ever knowing it, you know, like even as I was learning to read, realizing, you know, going back now, like, wait a minute, that's, you know, that's somebody that I think I saw that book, you know, now I'm realizing that artist drew something that I read when I was a small kid, and certainly had an influence on me as I went forward.
What was really interesting was when we talked about, I mean, obviously, as you've said, no, what you grow up with and the background and the different cartoons that you see almost certainly have an impact and can already overlay. And you were describing, you know, almost that intersection between older cartoons and also newer cartoons, and how you actually also draw on both of them as a point of inspiration as well.
I think so. The funny thing is I do look at, you know, animation and cartoon as a big influence, as well as you know, printed and um, just strictly still media, if you will. But there's a large influence for me that would be from a few years back. There's certainly some newer influences from animation that came out of Cal Arts in California. It was Cartoon Network, so a lot of illustrators there, and there would be Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab, Grimm. What was it? I can't remember. Grimm and Mandy and Grimm or something like that, where it's the Grim Reaper and the two kids. It's, you know, there's a lot of shows that had this sort of cartoon retro vibe. My Life as a Teenage Robot, another example of those, and Fairly Odd Parents, another favorite of mine. And there's kind of a common thread of those things happening at Cartoon Network at the same time. Just like I was saying on a call that we had, that you can see a current thread that sort of plays out now of some graduates that came out of Cal Arts around the same time, which is if you look at Craig of the Creek and you look at Steven Universe, there's sort of some similar art styles because a lot of those people went to school together and had similar influences, and they all bring different stuff to the table, which I think is that sort of mishmash that happens organically too in ourselves. Like I see those things, and sometimes it may be like, wow, how'd they draw this mouth, or how did the hand movement come out? Because even though I love Adventure Time and have some Adventure Time tattoos, that's sharing, you know, a little bit, but there's a style there that I love, but it's also not mine. But it's still, there's something about it that's a thread of happiness. Like if I had to say that there's a thread that's not art, not anything at all, it's just the sheer love of creation that kind of plays through. And my art is primarily aimed at making me smile, and then sort of, if you look at yourself as the consumer first, you're the one consuming the artwork. So hopefully we're all producing things that make us happy, and then when we share it, if we choose to share it, then we hope that it brings, you know, a smile to other people too. And I think that's the common thread is those things made me happy when I was a kid. They still make me happy now. I love cartoons and animation, comics and things like that, both online and not. And that's what I try to do with my own, you know, illustrations and sketch notes, is just try to bring this sort of humor. You know, I think too, like, I know Mike's maybe still on the call, but thinking about the sketch notes, like a lot of times I'm trying to think of something either like related and funny is the thing that I draw in the sketch notes. It's either like a sort of a joke, like if there's something like occasionally Back to the Future ends up in a lot of my things, or references there. So, or Dr. Evil, you know, like if it's something I think it's usually something slightly funny, or this juxtaposition of two ideas that hopefully then, you know, end up being funny. Like I've got a Post-it note in front of me of an illustration that I hope to get done in the next couple of days, and it's a play on Ernest Hemingway's An Old Man in the Sea, but I thought of it, and anybody that knows me knows that I like bees and things like that. So it's The Old Man and the Bee. And so I don't know if it's going to be an illustration or a cartoon, but I have the sketch, you know, the thumbnail sketch drawn, you know, in front of me, that I'm like, okay, that's the two things that sort of hit and play. and I want it to be funny, maybe not as dire as Hemingway's story of a man's struggle against the sea. I'm picturing the man and the bee being friends or roommates or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
No, but I really like that. You had that idea and you just sketched it out on a post-it and it's on your wall. And when you either, are in that in that space, and then you'll be able to, being able to collect those different thoughts together. And there we go. All the post-it. I wish I could make you the big one on the screen rather than me.
The man and the bee.
The man and the bee.
As I've drawn it, slightly, Hemingway inspired.
Pretty good post-it sketch, I have to say. My post-its do not look like that.
I try to keep them around because it's even the less precious version of things. Like, all right, I have this idea, I'm going to draw it on that, and then if I like it, then I'll put it in my sketchbook. And they do end up taped to my sketchbook, like the original post-it may end up there. Because sometimes it's the first thing I can grab. Like if I'm in a meeting for work, I'll grab the post-its because I've got a stack of them handy. So.
Yeah, a very useful tool to have on hand. I really like the way you use to describe your starting point of making you smile, and being able to, not necessarily come from anything particularly overridingly personal, or you have a particular mantra or some kind of, it's not even a high expectation, it's you want to make people happy with the art that you create, and there is a really lovely style that finds its way into your work as well. What was interesting in terms of exploring creative process, you do start by drawing things out using pencil and pen and paper and using your traditional tools. I wondered if you might talk a little bit more about how you integrate digital design into that process a little bit.
Well, it's kind of funny too, because I'm known as a sketch artist.
You to get the sketchbooks out as well, if you like.
I will, and I've got some here. And so for the longest time, obviously, the process has been the same for a long time. Like most of the time, I'm going to start on paper. I'd say that's changing occasionally now because there was something I was working on yesterday, and I did start doing a pencil sketch digitally, cause I was right there in the app. It was in Concepts, and so I love the pencil in Concepts. Like it's one of the ones that got it right. Like it draws like a pencil, and that's cool. So sometimes if I didn't quite get what I wanted in my original sketches, then I'll do that. But a lot of times I'll start on paper, and I often start with a pen on purpose, and because I love pencils and I love pencil drawings and used to only draw with pencils, but now I draw more straight with pens because it makes me sort of explore the idea a little bit, because if you lay down a mark and it wasn't what you wanted to, you can't correct it. So then what I'll do is iterate, keep drawing the same thing, and I'll get out an example in a minute in the sketchbook. But it's sort of, it makes you go through the process of ideation. And then you might find that as you're trying to draw it the way you're seeing it in your head, trying to get it out, you might find a happy accident. Like occasionally, I kind of like the head of this figure, but the eyes or the ears or the hair or something, else came out right on this other one. And so then it's sort of layering those in. So occasionally I've got 2 or 3 original sketches that'll come in, and when I go to do the final digital illustration in Concepts, I'm using the opacity to sort of layer them in so that I can then see and then draw the final over there, over the top of that and get it. And then the same thing too, like when I was trying to do something 2 nights ago, I still didn't really have the concept in my head right, and so I just grabbed the pencil, and then on my sketch layer that I would normally put a picture of something I'd drawn in there, I just started drawing with the pencil in there. It was like, okay, I think that's sort of loosely what I want, and then did the final over it. So it's sort of that process of that. But I love analog. Before the pandemic, I traveled all the time, and I couldn't always have my iPad out on the plane, especially if I was having several flights during the day. I might run out of battery, or always worried I would run out of battery. Whereas in a sketchbook, and I've got different sizes, like moleskins, like this is one that's about 3/4 size. I've got a smaller one that fits in my back pocket. I like the cashier's ones just because they're flexible and they can go inside my backpack with my iPad or my notebook. And then I've got like a bigger hardbound that's sort of, can sort of survive. And I'd say this is more like my final one of sorts. I was trying to find an example, but I think that it makes me, well, here's a good example for the big draw. So this is where I was playing with the ideas for how I wanted to draw the articles that we did on the big draw, and I was kind of sketching out, and sometimes I get pretty close the first time, and sometimes I don't. I was trying to find one where I'm more like iteration, where I tried, this is one from Halloween, so there are many versions of Frankenstein in The Bride, as I sort of iterated through and tried different heads and tried different body combinations. The Bride I kind of got right actually the first try, but I still went through the process anyway of going, all right, well, let me try to draw her again anyway. But I ended up going back to the first one. And occasionally that's great. Like sometimes you get it right the first time, but it still doesn't hurt to try to iterate and do it again. And sometimes it's trying to go in that concept of trying to make happy, like, well, what can I do to stretch this or push it a little bit that either makes it funnier or lighter? And what's the process of sort of playing with the form or the character a bit, especially if it's a known character like Frankenstein in Frankenstein's Bride. Like, okay, they're the classics, but what's my take on it? Like how is it slightly different? So you might draw it more along the lines of the original first, and then sort of play and push the boundaries. And I think that's where the lightness and the fun comes in from the creative act of eventually getting to see it through your own lens and your own voice. Like how do you get there as part of the process of, okay, first we all, mimic somebody that we like. As a kid, I was trying to draw the Marvel comic books, whether it was Thor was one of my favorites back in the day. I loved mythology. So Thor was right up my alley as a superhero, and whether it's trying to draw them or whatever character you're trying to draw, first you're going to mimic that artist. And when I was a kid, there were formidable Marvel artists as there are now. Like there was Jack Kirby, who he's a legend because of his artwork, and you try to mimic them. But I quickly realized that was, while I loved that stuff, that wasn't really what I was drawn to. There was something about it that was more like the cartoons. It was more like the sort of more playful elements. I love superheroes. But they were, kind of, I wanted a lighter take on it. I suppose that was the thing. It's like, how can I make this a little bit lighter and a little more levity? There's been a couple times I thought with politics, well, I could do a political cartoon. Absolutely could not do a political cartoon. It just isn't in my repertoire. Like it's just, there's been occasional times where I've tried and they either don't come off right, or it's maybe I should try to make them funnier. Like I guess they shouldn't be satirical, I guess would be my point. They don't need to be satire and mean spirited. Yeah. I can do funny.
Yeah. I'm already trying to think about like how your style could actually work for that, but yeah, we can see what that's like. We've had a couple of comments come in. Mike Brody has a question specifically regarding the pencil in concept. Andy, do you feel pencil helps you stay looser at times when compared with pen in your initial sketches? Actually, he's not talking about a pencil in sketch, and he's actually talking about a real pencil. I
think that they can't. Like I love pencil, and what I love about pencils, both for real and in concept, is the ability to build up something. Which is, if you think about sketching, you're sort of building the shape, and then allowing sometimes the loose marks to inform the final mark. And that's what I've always loved about pencils, is that ability to sort of build up over time. However, like digital, pencils suffer from the ability to undo, which obviously with apps, it's the undo button. With pencils, it's the eraser. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that, when, especially like going back to the idea and bringing Mike back in the picture, like thinking about sketch notes. If you're at a live event, you don't have the luxury of undo, especially once I switched to digital tools to try to capture live events. you can run the risk of trying to get too perfect, which is not bad. Like if you're doing a final illustration, absolutely do that. But if you're trying to capture a live event and do it quickly, then you're going to lose track, what's going on and what's being said. And so there's a time and place. I guess it's that sort of thing of there's the creative point when you're trying to be creative and play, and then there's the critical point when you're trying to refine. And so sometimes it's knowing when you've got to introduce those two halves at the right moment. So sometimes, again, the pencil. The funny thing is I occasionally use a pencil in my sketch notes when I know what to draw, but I don't have the time to draw it out for a second. So I'll use a pencil. I keep a pencil handy just to sort of block out the space that I want. If I'm doing it on, on paper, I'm going to block out that space and maybe even just quickly pencil in a note to myself, like one of the times I drew Dr. Evil for real at an Adobe conference live. It's like, all right, I sort of think I know what he looks like, but I'm not 100% sure. Like he's got on a suit and I think he's bald, but I'm not 100% sure of either one of those things. So I drew like a big circle for his head and a body and put Dr. Evil in pencil, and I left it until I could look up a reference, a few minutes after the conference ended, and then pinned it in really quick. So yeah, I do like pencils, but for whatever reason, I've gone more to markers of late.
Yes, you now start drawing with a marker.
With a marker, yeah, one of
Stop
two.
yourself from rubbing it out.
Do what?
To stop yourself from rubbing it out.
Yeah, I think so. It's to play more, to ideate more. Like it's, my day-to-day job is as a user interface consultant, and my junior designers, occasionally I'll make them start on paper. I'm just like, let's start on paper, because it's two ways. We can start with paper and pens, because then we're not precious with it and we sort of ideate. And then it's sort of, again, holding off that judgment. So I think the pen to me sort of made me make the critic wait a little bit. It's like, all right, you can get more critical about this later on, but you can play now. And if you don't like it, then you just draw another one right beside it in the sketchbook, or turn the page if it's, one of the smaller sketchbooks. And so it was sort of a better way of doing it. And I typically always had a pen handy, but I might not always have a pencil handy for whatever reason. So, but yeah.
So if you've got your trusty notebook, your little one in your back pocket, and your pen, then you're all set.
Usually I do. Like usually I've got something handy where I can draw with at some point. I mean, I'll use crayon if I have to, or finger paint. All right, that's not true. I can't.
Whatever's around, whatever's going. I mean, when you have to draw, you have to draw.
I admire these urban sketchers that like do buildings and street scenes, that do watercolors. First off, I'm just in admiration that they can do that out wandering around, because it's amazing. But I don't know how. Like I would end up with water all over me and paint all over me, which is okay,
And that probably is a skill to develop. Big Draw, people in the audience, that Big Draw loves to run a sketch crawl, but we do tend to limit those to pencils and portable materials. But yes, it completely, watercolor is a different field altogether. Mike, absolutely, playing in your drawing is underrated. I think that actually works really well with the conversations that we have been having, and especially the piece that you kindly wrote for us on how your sketchbook is full of creative inspiration. And it's not just about seeking inspiration from other places, but it's also about drawing inspiration from your own work as well.
It is, that's the funny thing is, like, I think that often, and I always got to, for the longest time, I would just do a sketchbook and fill it and wouldn't go back. And now it's going where I'm going through maybe a sketchbook or two, a big one a year in addition to the smaller ones. And so I try to flip back through it, and then now I'll put something there telling me that I want to go back and take a look at it. Like I did this sketch note, self-assigned sketch notes, quite a few last year, where I would just pick some sort of interesting topic or fact and research it for a minute and do it. I did this one on moats with alligators, the fiction that alligators are in moat, because it was wherever there's castle, there's moats, and it turns out to be mostly myth because they just weren't true. But I drew this alligator character, and I really sort of liked the alligator, and I want to do something with him later on. So I bookmarked that page, and there's several versions of the alligator there. And I was like, okay, I want to do something with this alligator down the line. There's these two sort of characters I think could be investigative people. One of them's an alligator, one of them's a cat, because cats are naturally curious. And so I've got, a couple of things like bookmarked, and whether it's a story or whether it's something I want to explore more, or whether it's just a drawing that I didn't think I kind of got to where I wanted it to be or want to do again. And so going back to there reminds you. And then on the bad days too, I think that there are days, I think like all of us, imposter syndrome is real. It's a real thing. And we get down on ourselves, and so it's easy to get stuck there and not want to draw. And I think that, and I'm using draw as a metaphor for me, for all creativity, whether you're, a mathematician, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a musician, whatever your medium is that you're creating in. I think it's good to reflect on your work. And so for me, that's the sketchbook and going back and looking at it. So it's that reminder of looking back at the things that you've already created, reminding you that you've already done it, and then you can do it again. And I think who better to encourage yourself than yourself? Like, I mean, it's great to get feedback from your peers, but there's days when I look back at the sketchbook and I'm like, how did I draw that? Like, I know I did because it's in my sketchbook. I can see that it's my style and I know that I did it, but there's days I'm like, all right, I already solved this problem before. Like, I struggle with hands and other things to draw, and occasionally I'll look back and go, wait, I've already solved this. Like, this character you drew last year has the hand you're trying to draw, just draw it that way again.
How would you describe your particular style of illustration? There's a particular way that you described it in the past.
I think that it's the closest thing is it's cartoon retro, and it's certainly influenced by mid-century modern and our cartoons. I think that that's probably the loosest thing for me. I was a photographer in high school for a newspaper, like getting paid for real, working for a newspaper, and then after high school, before going to college, and during college, I was still working part-time for these newspapers. So for me, always photography was what I wanted to do. That was, if I was going to capture the world realistically, that's what I was going to do. And my mother and my sister can do very realistic illustrations and paintings and things, which has always been something that I can do and had to do when I took art classes and things like that. But it's not something that either interests me or that I excelled at. So for me, like, the imagination was there. So I think that my style is loosely cartoon retro. I will say there were somebody with my permission had reached out and commissioned me to do a piece for them on LinkedIn to accompany a thing they drew. And immediately somebody saw it, a coworker saw it in the feed and said, that's Andy McNally's drawing, and was taking up for me. Because they thought that they had used it without permission. And it was really a flattering moment to know that somebody could see something and know immediately that it was something that I did. Because like, for me, like, I hope there's a thread through there, but I'm not always 100% sure. And I think that all of us occasionally are going to experiment with a style or something. Like, I'll see something like, well, that's interesting. Like, let me try that out for a second. And then hopefully as we get more comfortable, something might resonate, but as the way that we would do it. Like, okay, I see how they did that. How does that work in the way that I do things? Whether it's color, or whether it's the positioning of a body. Like, my positions, I think, are often very stiff, even when there's a curve to the positioning of the hands and stuff like that, which is a very cartoon, modern, mid-century sort of way of drawing things, because the poses were exaggerated and stiff on purpose. on purpose. So that sort of carries to my work, even when I don't want it to. Like even when I'm trying to be playful and a little bit more free, it still doesn't want to. Like some big painting heroes of mine are Keith Haring, the graffiti artist and painter, and then Basquiat, the painter. And both of them draw way more fluidly than I could ever draw. And I love it, but even if I want to, I'm like, I'm going to draw like that today. I'm going to paint like that today. It's just not in my DNA. Like, it's just not going to happen. Or like, I don't think so.
I think that's really interesting. You touch on all those different elements as well, and especially when you come back to that idea of someone else recognizing a piece of work as yours and being in your style. We very briefly touched upon, I mean, we probably could do a whole section on just cartoons that inspire Andy's work, but we've talked about superheroes and I suppose, yeah, the Hanna-Barbera style of artwork, and then we've got Disney, and you've also got the kawaii that we've also talked about as well. And when you think about all these different examples, when you think about your style, do you consider them alongside your style, like you said, to try and take from those different styles and then see how you can reinterpret that? And how do you find that balance? Because as you say, when we're starting out, people have an approach to different what they actually want to work towards, and it's not necessarily about replicating something exactly as they see it, but it's also about being able to find that middle ground. And I think we're all, a lot of different artists are like, what is the secret answer to finding their style? And I realize you may not have that answer, but I mean, your personal experience.
I'm going to misquote somebody badly, and I don't remember who did it. I don't. There's somebody, I think maybe it's Ira Glass, podcaster, writer, who said, in Andy J. Pizza, fellow Columbus, Ohio person, is quoted and also talks about this in his podcast, Creative Pep Talk, which I highly recommend for creative people or just anybody in general. But they talk about building your taste. And so a lot of what you're doing when you're first looking at, and I think the same thing that I did just organically, not thinking about, how it was doing, was I was looking at things that I liked or I thought were good. Like I was, whether it was the Hanna-Barbera cartoons or Marvel, and thinking, and kawaii is definitely an influence of mine. And it's obvious, especially through a lot of characters, but anything inanimate that I make, have character and voice. It's definitely kawaii influence, but I think it's a mash of those things. Like I think hopefully as you try them, you're developing your taste about what you like, and seeing then as you try it what fits your individual taste. And so for me, a lot of my faces do lean a little towards the kawaii, no nose, wide apart eyes. I don't often do the cheek, like rosy cheeks and things like that that I see with like Becky Cass and some of the really, really lovely kawaii drawings of some of the present artists. But I think that, it was through drawing I developed this style. And as I look at the old man and the bee in front of me, like I see a Muppet nose on him. Like, and so sometimes when I do a nose, it's sort of like that Muppet, like big, because the Muppets are made out of felt and this dimensional sort of thing. I like that sort of, play too. So there's sometimes these elements that creep in because aesthetically, that was the taste that sort of built up. And the Muppets are great. I mean, talk about somebody that makes you laugh and are funny.
The Muppets are fantastic.
The Muppets are fantastic, and I grew up with them, and I love the new stuff, too, that they've done of recent years as well. But I think that's it. Is you build this thing, and in the cool thing now, and you could do it before, like Pinterest. Like a lot of these tools we think are new, but they're really just digital version of analog things that we always did. Because you would have cut it out of a magazine or found something, and you made your manual analog Pinterest board. Now you can do it digitally, and you can.
What you did in the 90s before you had things like.
We used glue or tape, or whatever. We made a version of that, and so you found these things that influenced you, and you immersed yourself in them, and then replicated them, and then figured out what you liked or what you didn't like when you were doing it too. Because sometimes there's that difficulty of trying to replicate somebody, and you don't want to copy. You know, there's that fine line. Even though Austin Kleon's books are amazing, you know, the Still Like an Artist series. I got to meet him in Washington D.C. when I was working there. So his books are fantastic about, you know, you're borrowing, as so many of our peers and so many of our legends that we looked at too. They either looked at something before and reacted against it, or went off on their own, but based off of those sort of things. And I think that even in animation, you know, Japanese animation, a lot of it can either be as a response to Hayao Miyazaki or as an influence by Hayao Miyazaki, or both. And, you know, like going back personally, for me, photography was when I wanted to do real stuff, and it seemed more tedious for me to get it right, at least in arts, you know, in art in school. And so for me, the reaction was, well, I want to do cartoons, and they make me happy. And so that was, you know, sort of that push and pull reaction, at least personally for me. But yeah, I think it's about developing your taste. Like you look and you find the things that call out to you, you know, in terms of building your process, and then you borrow the pieces that work, and so it ends up being Frankenstein's monster, you know, at the end, but more like the Bride than Frankenstein, because he wasn't always depicted that handsomely. And the Bride often, with her, at least in the big, you know, old black and white movies, she had the big hair, and you know, came off. She came off in an elegant way, you know, even though she rebuked his monstrous ways.
Yeah, bit of some Morticia Addams vibes there.
Oh yeah, Morticia Addams, the new Wednesday Netflix series is good.
If you're looking for new inspiration, shows to watch and books to read, we're going to have a bumper.
I know.
I'll see if we can scoop them all together. Go on, Andy.
It's going to be like T.S. Eliot's A Wasteland. The poem isn't that long, but all the references are a book. So that's going to be the thing here. It's going to be like a 15-mile long list of things.
Yeah. We started with Hemingway. We're now currently on Wednesday on Netflix. So, you know,
Adams and yeah.
There's a whole load of different things. I really like that idea of building your taste and really asking yourself, like, what is it that you genuinely like? What are you drawn towards? And then just starting that process. And sometimes it's actually easier to say no, what you don't like, before you actually maybe be able to work out what you do. I think that's a really nice part of the process. Just touching on something that you have mentioned, and your drawing of hands. Had a conversation about it because we were comparing different people, and it was actually really interesting. We were like, oh, here are these 5 different artists, and none of them drew hands the same way. Yeah,
I think that especially with cartoons, there's always a liberty. Like some people are going to draw them with all the fingers. Yeah. Right, they're going to draw them with all fingers. There's the old school Disney way of doing it. They didn't want to draw hands with Mickey Mouse, so they put mittens or gloves on. Sometimes those gloves had 4 fingers. Sometimes they had
I never noticed that.
Yeah, that was their way of, I forget why. There's like a longer tale story.
Reason why? If anyone knows the reason why Mickey Mouse has different numbers of fingers, or he has gloves on.
Well, I think the most modern example of different numbers of fingers is Adventure Time. So the Adventure Time characters, they very blatantly, I've got one of the books, like The Art of Adventure Time, and they very explicitly say, well, the characters can have 3 fingers, 4 fingers, 5 fingers. It doesn't, like, it just has to fit whatever the scene is. And I thought that was quite lovely. So occasionally mine will only have 3, especially if there's no thumb, you know, and there may be a creature, a cat or something like that. But, you know, there's the mitten technique too, where you just really sort of have the thumb and the rest of the hand is sort of a mitten. You can draw lines on it or not. But for me, like, they're tough. I try to break things down into basic shapes, and the hands is the one that I'm constantly going, okay, it's rectangle, the hand's sort of a rectangle, and the thumb sort of hangs off. You know, it's sort of like breaking it down slowly. But most of the time, my characters have 4 fingers, and I think that that's fairly typical of a lot of animations, especially, you know, 60s, 70s, and that sort of way. I don't know why they chose to do it, but for me, it sort of worked out. It does make it a little bit simpler,
Mm.
to convene until it's not. Like when you're trying to do a piece and we're like, wait, there's only two fingers, and then the other two, like, so then like five would actually make more sense, but I still do it with four anyway. It works,
I
Yeah,
mean, that's the thing. And I think it's not necessarily saying, oh, we're going to go away and start counting the number of fingers Mickey Mouse has.
right.
We're not going to do that in case anyone says.
That's homework.
But it's, pardon?
That's homework. We can all go and
It's homework, yeah. If anyone would like to do it, and then come and let us know. Rod has said in the chat that he used to do fewer, and now he does 5. So I think there is that.
I'm in admiration of the ones who do 5. I think that, especially like comic book, like they're always going to do, realistic and figures and stuff like that, and they've always do 5.
Mm.
I was trying to think, Gerald, it's the Umbrella Academy. My apologies. Hopefully they're not watching. Brazilian friends. Boa tarde. Desculpe for getting it wrong. But like I look at them and the way that they draw, and they have very good hands and characters that as they go through their things.
But there is that versatility, isn't there? So we all know that maybe, at the end of something that looks like an arm, there's something that's going to be a hand. But, as long as there is something there that hints at it, be it a mitten or otherwise.
I think too, if we think about, there's the realistic approach, which for me was more photography, and I love photography and doing that. But for me, there was more of the feeling of things, I think is what I like about, in particular cartoons they're exaggerated because they're trying to either, evoke more comedy or more emotion, because if cartoons can't be emotive if anybody can get through the beginning of Up without crying the first time through watching it, I'm impressed. But it's so heartfelt. Like it's such a beautiful thing, and part of that too is that ability sometimes of this thing that isn't realistic being as emotional, or maybe more so, because it tells the story in a more true way, where the emotion is has a part to play as the character as much as the visual does.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point as well. Thinking about how the image that you create, and obviously the impact that it has, but then also your intentions behind it, coming back to what you were saying before about you wanting to make people smile. A lot of your work has quite bright colors. You do seem to gravitate towards the blues and definitely kind of like nice brick coral shades of red and orange.
That one, that's funny. Like I kind of have, so the palette that was for the illustrations for the sketchbook article and for the big draw is a secondary palette that I've been using lately, which is even more bright for me. Like it's a really bright pink, a really sort of cyan blue, which is, and then there's a really bright yellow, which is funny because it really is CMYK, the color. It's cyan, magenta, yellow, and then there's a dark deep black that I use, and white. And so it's straight up that. But I would say my color palette overall is influenced by bright, childlike color palettes, and it's often because of that. Occasionally, I'll occasionally do a more subdued color palette if I'm trying to, but I've been trying to sort of stick to this core palette that I picked out. And it is bright, it's very childlike, and it's very happy. And occasionally I'll mix in something if I need to, or I'll just I'll pick one color and try to just use that, as a tone throughout it. But I think it's again going back to those cartoons. Cartoons the same way. They're trying to tell things visually, and I do use occasionally the color is trying to tell part of the story, in the illustration of it. Like it's being used to be part of the story for some way, occasionally either for emphasis or as the common thread. And that'll happen in sketch notes. There was a couple years back when I was at one of the Apple WWDCs in person. And so I would use a certain color to always be with a certain thing that I drew throughout the week of doing sketch notes. Like, okay, if it's going to be this way, then this color is going to be used, and I'm going to try to use this color over. And then like a year later, that developed into a series of sort of characters that were at the WWDC. There was this A5 chip, which is the chip in the Apple back then. Now I guess we're on 10 or whatever the chip is now. And so there was a character that if a technology thing was introduced, the chip might get introduced to introduce the chip. And one of them was the camera lens I nicknamed him Lynn. And he only had one eye because at the time there weren't the 15 lenses on the back of the phone that we have now, right? There's not that many, but we could all see it coming. There was an Android phone the other day that I think had 6 lenses on the back. So it's going to get crazier. But so, it was sort of then the cartoons influencing the sketch notes, because then I had these characters because I'd been at the WWDC for so many years in a row. And I'm like, okay, there's going to be a character, lens character that's going to occasionally talk about camera features. There's going to be a chip that if it's talking about technology, is going to talk about the technology. If it's talking about programming, I introduced my own version of Apple's the iOS development Swift application. There we go. I will learn to speak one day. Is sort of a bird that reminds me of a crow. So I sort of made my own version of that character and made it a crow. And so occasionally the crow would introduce sort of development features, in the sketch notes.
Oh, okay. So now the crow makes so much more sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, okay, they've got a black, or often it was depicted as a black bird. Swift. It was a swift.
Okay.
But I kind of morphed it a little bit more into more of like a crow, and but that was my, bird that was, introducing development concepts, especially at WWDC. So yeah. I think that was always for me, like even the sketch notes, often the visual came to mind pretty quick. Like I would latch into something that the speaker said, and that triggered something visually, and then I knew that I wanted that on the page. And I knew I was going to try to get the facts in too, but the facts were my version of sketch notes of a live event isn't going to be a one-to-one match for the event. I'm going to pick the highlights, and often they're going to kind of go with this concept of ideas that I'm, placing in my head, and often sparked right there on the fly, like something that happened and said, okay, I've got that. And that's just a matter of practice too, like of your process, drawing repetitively enough to go, I can fall back on this. Like I know that worst case is I'll just going to draw an iPhone. If I don't have anything else to draw, I'll draw the iPhone there. And often my iPhones will have a face on their screen. So it is what it is. I make no apologies.
No, that's true. We would never ask such a thing. With your sketching thing, you were saying then you have your illustrations first, and then you wait for the different highlights. And I think that's. Do you go and have a look at Andy's Instagram account? There's a lot of lovely sketchnoting pictures on there, and there's a lot on his website as well. But if anyone is coming back, having joined us for a session with Mike Rohde, there are lots of different approaches to sketchnoting.
Oh, definitely check out Mike's stuff for sure. Mike's amazing.
Yes, and Mike is led by so many different wonderful forms of inspiration. But if you are looking to explore sketchnoting, do have a look at both Andy and Mike's approaches. But be able to decide and decide maybe how much they can inspire yours and see how you get on. So we've touched on quite a few different areas that we said we were going to explore today. And
Rob Zilla was just in the comments and commented, thank you, Rob. Hope all is well with you and the family. Please check out Rob's artwork. Absolutely amazing. He loves sports and does a lot of, not only sports, but just all around just amazing artist in general, and all around nice guy too, and good speaker and teacher. All the things. He's an inspiration too. I'm never going to be able to draw like him. He draws realistically.
One more to add to the list, everyone. We have had a question from the lovely Kate Mason, former director for The Big Draw. Thank you for joining us, Kate. Hope you're doing all right. Kate's asked, have you ever come across someone clearly copying your work?
Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody caught it again. Somebody caught it, not me. There was a Chinese company that had put almost a throwaway sketch of mine on some shirts. So I ended up ceasing and desist thing, and this has been a couple of years back. So I haven't seen anything recently. I know that Gemma Correll is an artist who has a lovely loose style, and there are some corporations that actually tried to rip her off, and I think that's the beauty of garnering an audience, is that they look out for you, and my audience is not that big. I'm thankful for everybody that you know, gives me the benefit of looking at my stuff, but I think that it's hard to look at it, and it takes time and devotion. Obviously, as you get farther along and some of it's commissioned, then there's some legal processes where companies help you because they're part of the process too. But no, I mean, like, hopefully looking at it through a different lens. So there's clearly people that, like this company that was putting on shirts, was trying to make a profit from it. That's not cool. Like, I think we all agree on that. But I think that when somebody is looking at something, because again, they're maybe where they are in the process is going, I like what this person does, and is trying to then sort of work their way through their process in drawing it. That's, that's flattery. And that kind of goes back to Austin Kleon, like the good artist steal sort of thing as well. We all sort of are influenced at first. I mean, like, my influences that are many, but there's some that are, clearly like North Stars, like looking at Keith Haring. I'm pointing as if everybody can see the Funko Keith Haring behind me. So it's a Funko Keith Haring. So Keith Haring is actually here. We don't have many conversations. He doesn't ever say anything back. But like, clearly he's an influence, and the way that his graffiti was, I love the bold line work, stuff like that. And I've oddly tried to mimic it a couple times. Again, it just never comes off right. But I think that as we look at those things, hopefully that's what happened. And hopefully that's what people are doing, is they're looking at it, they're trying to figure out how they want to move forward with their creative process. And, if it gets worse, if it's a corporation, something like that, obviously, then it's hard to, I mean, like, all of us deal with that. It's both the good thing and the bad thing about the world we live in now, because it is easy for people to go and do that. And we have AI right now, which is obviously, I'm still not sure where to stand on that one, because it is drawing from so many artists. But I think that that's optimistically why I think that all of us as creatives, whatever our field is going to be, is we're going to be needed, because we all think uniquely the way that we do. So even if you mimic me, or you mimic Rob or Mike or Keith Haring or whoever you're mimicking, eventually you're going to have these other things that are unique to your life that then collide with that, and then create this new thing. And I don't think that AI in its current state, hopefully we're not going to get to the Terminator or any of those creepy states where we're going to have to fear for our lives. But, I think that what, as humans, we bring to it is the lives that we live, and the beautiful things that happen to us because of who we are uniquely. And that it just, even if you have a twin, it's hard to replicate. Like, twins are similar, but they experience life as we all do in our own lens, and it becomes this blender, and then you get your artwork out of it. So hopefully,
blender of everything.
Yeah, hopefully, if my work contributes to somebody in blending through what they come, then that's it's flattering to me. I'm honored in that way.
Have you ever come across someone who you can see, or you've ever like worked with students, I suppose, who might have like taken some real inspiration from your artwork in particular, or from your process, and then you can see that maybe but you can also see their take on it, their twist.
I don't. I can't say from illustration always somebody having done that. I haven't seen anybody so far that's done that. From my day job, yes, I've seen people even in the last month, like my coworkers went, they just took the design you made and made it this company's color. I went, I know. But I said, to be fair, I was influenced by other companies too. So like, but no, from an illustration standpoint, I don't think that I've seen anybody where you're
Okay.
like, oh, that's necessarily mine. If so, and I should be looking, please, call me out on it. You can message me or whatever. And again, hopefully it's a jumping off point, like
Yeah.
whatever it may be. Like hopefully that's
Mhm.
it's the maybe I ended up on their Pinterest board and gave them some inspiration, whether
Yeah.
it's got to illustrate some way. For me, like we talked about this too. Like for me, I can't intrinsically separate the sketch notes from my illustrations because the only thing the
Yeah.
sketch notes has is more words than a typical drawing would be. And that was what I was trying to work through the other night was um, I'm redoing my newsletter and
Yeah.
from the Art Crusade to
Yeah. It's renamed now.
rename now to And He Draws. A play on
See
my
what you've
name.
done there.
I know, clever, right? It's a dad joke, I think, probably, because there's probably a lot of people really. But I thought, well, I wanted to do that. Like, I didn't dislike the Art Crusade, but I felt like that I wanted to be more playful with the newsletter, and I felt like I was trying to be too tough on myself, and I'm still doing it, to be clear. And I was trying to say, how do I announce this to everybody that it's the same thing that you're following, and I'm going to do this. And so it was trying to, all right, is it going to be more like a sketch note now? Is it going to be more like a comic? Is it going to be all those things? And so I'm struggling with that right at the minute. Like, all right, do I want to handwrite stuff because I'm terribly slow when I handwrite? Should it have some of my handwriting and some other things? It's the things that all creatives struggle through.
Yeah. And there's always those different questions, and like you said, how you have the process that you go through in order to, the reason why you said earlier right at the beginning that you start with a pen now. It's less about critiquing how good the pencil lines are and what your options are. It's more about going, okay, so maybe that shape doesn't quite work, let's try this one over here. And it's more about that focus on the development as opposed to the need to change, the need to revise, the need to go back. We've had a lovely comment from Bart and Angus. As an art teacher, lots of students copy to begin their journey, which is okay, but to publish, I think it helps helps for them to sometimes work out their voice, and they love the idea of the blender, of mixing it all up.
Like that's like even my own drawings, I'm kind of like bringing it back. Like you can blend yourself too. Like I was making the comment earlier that I don't remember. There's several instances where I can't, like the marker drawings exploring and making me explore my own stuff would be that like I was saying, I didn't get something right in each version, but there was a piece right in a version that I liked. And so then layering that in and then drawing and then trying to come up with a new piece was really cool. So you can not only blend other people's stuff, you can blend your own stuff too. Even in a blender.
We promise it's not that painful. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think what is really interesting is, you do keep coming back to these different people who you really enjoy their style, and it's even you've always said that at this point you're still going to keep eyes out for different people and different styles, especially within illustration. We've talked about Fred Blunt and maybe how you feel that he's maybe the successor to Quentin Blake with his really lovely illustration style.
I mean, like Quentin Blake's illustrations, most people have encountered him for the most part in the series Roald Dahl book. He was pretty, as far as I know, in all the original books, he was the only illustrator. And Fred Blunt's style really reminds me of Quentin's a lot, in all of the good ways. And they're uniquely Fred too. Like if you show me to, even if he was copying Quentin, I would still go, no, that's Fred's drawing and that's Quentin's drawing, because even though they look like they're this sort of heritage of each other, they're both uniquely theirs. And I admire the looseness of the way that they draw, and then they pull it all together again too. It's sort of this thing that, again, I even when I want to draw like that, there's something that doesn't come. I ended up not being able, because there's, again, hopefully that piece that's you creeps in. You're like, well, this is going to look too much like them, and I need for it to look like
Mhm.
me. And that's hopefully the place you get to. Like, and sometimes it takes a while, and there's some people that seem like they have always done that, and that's the way that it's gonna be. And sometimes it's maybe and one of the reasons too, like thinking about concepts. One of the beautiful things about concepts, the app, is that you can not only play with your drawing, but you can play with the way that the the tool is, the brush is. So that is, say, you could start off with a pencil, the pencil tool, and you've drawn that, and then decide, well, how would this look if it were the marker, or how it would look if it were this or that or the other. And I think that that's beautiful too, because one of the things, thinking about some of the kawaii artists, is they have really um, they pick a fixed width tool
Mhm.
brush, typically, even though it may
Yeah.
have, it's not a perfect like vector circle. It's got these warbles that let you know that it's hand drawn and stuff like that. But there's times when I go back and forth in my own artwork. There's one of the tools typically that I've been using lately is it's a felt marker. I can't actually remember what the tool is right this minute in concepts, and I love it because it sort of reminds me of my analog sort of. It's got a little bit of rough edge to it, but there is a fixed width pen in concepts that I love too, and so I now will choose to apply it when I think it's right for the illustration. There's sometimes when I want
Mhm.
a smooth look, and then there's sometimes that if I know that I'm going to take it and develop it further, vector wise, I
Mhm.
know that the fixed width is more forgiving in other programs. Like, it's got more of a vector path to it that I can manipulate too. So there's occasionally like knowing the tool too, like, okay, I know that I'm going to export this, and then I'm going to make it even bigger and go even more grandiose with it. Whereas some of the downsides of some of the other tools is it'll have too many vector points. So that was getting too geeky. I apologize for everybody for a minute.
No,
But
that's absolutely fine.
but I think going, tying it back full circle to the process though is sometimes it's not even the way that somebody draws. It may be like, wonder how my drawing would look with that tool. So as to say, like, if you normally draw with a pen that has a variable width to it, what would it look like if it was a standard uniform width? And I think that those are fun things to play with too. Even like color palettes too. Like, um, sometimes you'll see color palettes that are, inspiring, and I think that's as much looking at that, and because there are artists that just seem to ultimately just have a beautiful handle on color and applying it. And I'm not always one of those. I think I struggle at it a bit, but I've I've muddled through it, and I made it work, I guess.
You seem to do pretty well. I mean, that's from a third party.
Yeah.
Um, if you are curious about all of these things Andy's talking about with the mystery behind vectors and the pen and the pencil in concepts, come and join us for a session we're going to be running in 2 weeks on the 8th of March with Andy on getting started with character design. Do not panic. You do not have to be a digital drawing expert. You do not even necessarily need to have a tablet at all. Andy, we're going to start with pen and paper. It's going to be the three of us again, myself, Annelise, and Andy. So come and join us for a free Zoom workshop. You can find the link through our Instagram account through the link tree, and if you also follow us on Eventbrite, it is all there. And do sign up for that, completely free, and it's for an hour. So do come and join us. I'm trying to think if I've definitely managed to get all of the nuts and bolts of your creative process out of you. I think what we always came back to was this idea of being able to draw on so many different spaces for inspiration, and I think I'm going to try and collect together all the different inspirations you've mentioned and add
I
them to your already
apologize.
colorful collection. Never apologize for having lots of inspiration. I mean, we didn't even let you, list all of the cartoons, so
I
we had
know.
to.
We could be here.
Yeah.
We could be here all evening, I think.
We really could, really could. But also, we had Lindsay Hunter and Mike Lowry as two of the key inspirations that you
Mhm.
thought were really lovely to have a look at. And what we liked with Mike was the style of his illustration, but almost the way that he sits somewhere in between. Mike, if you ever watch this, we're not saying you're a sketchnoter, but we feel like there's a little hint of sketchnoting going on there, especially with the sketches of his holidays, which are lovely.
His sketchbook in particular, because he does such a wonderful job of words and stuff, and he has just such a lovely style that, again, is just Mike Lowry. Like it's the way that it looks. I've been a fan of his for many years now, and it is, you know, like it does remind me of sketch notes. Like I don't know why it does, but like I said, he doesn't do sketch notes, or at least I'm aware. Maybe he does. Maybe he writes more stuff in his style. Just like they're the lettering artists, and like you could just add a couple of things, and you'd be a sketch note artist too. Timothy Goodman, I think is his name. I'm looking. There's a book. I've got it. Timothy Goodman is an illustrator, author. He's got a new book that just came out too, but he reminds me of Keith Haring, and he uses a ton of words and illustrations fluidly. And he's got his one of his books is the Sharpie Workshop, I think is the name of it. And it features a lot of other artists in there too, talking about going with Sharpies and stuff like that. But Timothy's work itself, I got to meet him for just a minute at one of the Adobe conferences when he was presenting, and his work too, like it almost reminds me of sketch notes, but it has the drawing aspect, and he really reminds me of Keith Haring in some ways, and his style of graffiti and the way that he draws. But yeah, I think that it's, you know, again, the creative process, like going back to it, like if you want to add words to your drawing, or if you want to only do words for your drawing, you know, that's great. That's one of the, Mike wrote, you know, speaking of which too, like I love the way his lettering and stuff in there.
Mine is beautiful lettering.
His lettering is wonderful, and he has such varied too. Like he's really good at it. I feel like my lettering is almost always the same. Like I might make stuff a little bit bigger as a headline, because my sketches tend to rely a little bit heavier on the drawings, I think. So
I do like how Back to the Future managed to get in there with going back to the sketchbook. Do have a look at Andy's lovely piece about how your sketchbook is a place for creative inspiration. And if you find yourself struggling for inspiration, do have a look at that. Mike's still with us. Oh shucks, he's all hiding behind his hand at this point.
Mike's work is awesome. He's an amazing artist and letterer. Like he's the real deal. Like he's all of it. He's a unicorn.
And you can watch our interview with Mike Grady and see and there we go. You compare all our sketch notes and take inspiration from both of our conversations. We're after 7:30, so we're gonna maybe we round off our conversation for this evening. But thank you so much, Andy, for joining us, and thank you, Annelise, for stepping in to be able to combat those concept questions. Slightly less technical chat, I suppose, for this one compared to previous sessions, but it's always good to be able to have that option as well. The 8th of March, everyone, have a look on our link tree and do get your ticket, and we will see you there. And thank you very much, Andy, Annelise, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you both. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us.